stood in the kitchen clutching a porcelain plate when my son Marcus said to his wife, his voice cold as a November gust, "If Mom dies, we'll finally be free." Those words sliced through my heart like a blade, shredding the love I'd poured into my only child. I, Hilda Braun, a 68-year-old black widow, had sold my late husband's home to give Marcus $150,000 for this house in suburban Chicago, where I now linger like a shadow in a cramped back apartment. The plate trembled in my hands, as if it felt my soul fracturing, as Lisa, my daughter-in-law, replied, casual as if discussing the weather, "You're right, she's a burden." I stood frozen, my breath caught, staring at the cookies I'd baked for my grandkids on the counter, now meaningless, and wondered, how could I stay in the home I'd given my life to build for them? The kitchen air hung heavy with the scent of cinnamon from the cookies I'd baked, now cooling on the counter like relics of a life I thought I knew. My hands, still clutching the porcelain plate, felt foreign, as if they belonged to someone else, someone who hadn't just heard her only son wish her dead. I, Hilda Braun, stood rooted to the linoleum floor of this suburban Chicago house, my breath shallow, my chest tight. Marcus's words echoed in my skull. "If Mom dies, we'll finally be free." Lisa's reply, so casual it chilled me, played on a loop. "You're right, she's a burden." I stared at the plate, its delicate blue flowers mocking the fracture in my heart. How had it come to this? When did my son, the boy who once clung to my hand at the county fair, become a man who saw me as a chain to break? I set the plate down, careful not to let it clatter, afraid any noise might betray my presence behind the cracked kitchen door. The silence was worse than their words, a deafening void that swallowed the warmth of this house I'd helped build. I'd sold my home, the one my late husband, George, and I had filled with laughter and Sunday dinners, to give Marcus and Lisa $150,000 for this place. The deed still bore my name, a detail Marcus promised to fix later. Later never came. I moved into the back apartment, a 300-square-foot room with peeling wallpaper, and a single window that overlooked their garage. I told myself it was enough, that being close to my grandkids, Lila and Jamal, made it worth it. I'd convinced myself my sacrifices were love, not obligation. But now, standing here, I felt like a fool. My fingers brushed the edge of the counter, where I'd spent countless evenings rolling dough for Lila's birthday cakes or packing Jamal's lunches when Lisa was too busy. I saw the ghost of my old self in every corner of this kitchen. The woman who wired money when Marcus's car broke down, who paid the electric bill when their account ran dry. I'd given everything, thinking it tethered us closer. But Marcus's voice, so steady, so cold, told a different story. When did he stop seeing me? When did I become a burden instead of a mother? I backed away from the door, my knees trembling, and sank into a chair at the small table I wasn't supposed to use. The cookies stared back at me, their edges uneven from Lila's eager hands helping me shape them. I'd spent $12 on the sprinkles she loved, red and green, for the holidays, because she said they made her smile. I'd wanted to make this Thanksgiving special, to fill this house with the warmth I'd lost when George died. I thought I was needed. I thought I was wanted. But Marcus's words stripped that illusion bare, leaving me raw, like skin scraped open by a fall. My mind spiraled to the day we signed the papers for this house. Marcus had hugged me, his eyes wet, promising I'd always have a place here. "You're our rock, Mom," he'd said. I believed him. God help me, I believed every word. I sold our old home, the one with the creaky porch swing, where George and I planned our future, for $150,000 to secure theirs. I kept nothing for myself, except a small savings account I hadn't touched since. I thought it was enough to be part of their lives, to hear Lila's laughter, to braid her hair before school. But now those memories felt like lies I'd told myself to keep going. I stood, my legs unsteady, and moved to the sink, gripping the edge to steady my shaking hands. The faucet dripped, a slow, maddening rhythm that matched the pulse in my temples. I wanted to scream, to storm into the living room and demand an explanation. But what would I say? How could you? Why do you hate me? The words felt too small for the wound they'd left. Instead, I reached for the notebook I kept in the drawer, the one with grocery lists and reminders to pick up Jamal's asthma inhaler. I flipped to a blank page and wrote, my hand trembling, "If Mom dies, we'll finally be free." I stared at the words, black ink on white paper, as if writing them could make them less real. But they were real. My son had said them. My son, whom I'd carried through fevers and nightmares, who I'd cheered for at every basketball game, wished me gone. The house was quiet now, the murmur of Marcus and Lisa's voices gone. They'd moved to the living room, probably scrolling their phones, oblivious to the wreckage they'd left in me. I closed the notebook, my fingers lingering on its worn cover. George's voice echoed in my mind, from years ago when we set up our accounts. Protect yourself, Hilda, even from family. I hadn't listened. I'd trusted Marcus with everything, my money, my home, my heart. And now here I was, a stranger in a house I'd paid for, a mother reduced to a burden. I looked around the kitchen at the Thanksgiving decorations I'd hung for the kids. Paper turkeys taped to the fridge, a centerpiece I'd crafted from pine cones. They felt like props in a play I no longer belonged in. My chest tightened, a hollow grief spreading to my bones. Where had I gone wrong? When did Marcus stop being the boy who drew me pictures, who called me his hero when George passed? I didn't have answers, only questions that cut deeper with every breath. I slid the notebook back into the drawer, my hands steadier now, and glanced at the back door leading to my apartment. I needed to be alone, to think, to figure out what came next, because one thing was clear. I couldn't stay here, not like this, not anymore. I slipped through the back door to my apartment, the hinges creaking like an accusation. The narrow hallway smelled of damp plaster, and the single bulb overhead flickered, casting shadows on the walls that seemed to close in. I sank onto the edge of my twin bed, its springs groaning under my weight, and stared at the peeling floral wallpaper George picked out years ago for our old home. My hands, still dusted with flour from the cookies, trembled as I clasped them in my lap. Marcus's cruel wish for my absence clawed at my mind, each syllable a fresh wound. When had my boy, the one who'd drawn stick figure families with crayons, decided I was a cage to escape? I looked around my cramped space, cramped but just enough for me. A single dresser held my clothes folded tight to fit. A faded photo of George and me at Navy Pier sat on the nightstand, his arm around my waist, both of us laughing into the wind. I'd given up our family home, every memory with George to secure their future. I thought it would keep us close, that I'd be the grandma who braided Lila's hair, who taught Jamal how to whistle. But now, the truth sat heavy in my chest. I'd traded everything for a place where I wasn't wanted. My eyes drifted to the corner where a stack of Lila's old drawings lay, her shaky handwriting spelling out, "Love you, Nana." I'd pinned them up until Lisa said they cluttered the space. I'd taken them down, biting my tongue because I didn't want to be trouble. I'd spent my life not being trouble, paying their electric bill when Marcus's hours got cut, buying groceries when Lisa's yoga studio job didn't cover the fridge. I'd slipped $50 into the kitchen drawer when I noticed their car needed gas, thinking it was my way of holding the family together. But what had it gotten me? A son who wished me dead, a daughter-in-law who saw me as a weight to shed. I stood, my knees aching, and walked to the small mirror above the dresser. My reflection looked older than 68, the lines around my eyes deeper, my braids streaked with more gray than I remembered. When did I start fading? I thought back to Marcus's high school graduation, how he'd hugged me so tight I could barely breathe, whispering, "You're the best, Mom." I'd worked double shifts at the hospital to pay for his basketball camp, skipped vacations to save for his college fund. George and I had dreamed of a legacy for him, a life where he wouldn't struggle like we did. But somewhere along the way, that boy became a man who spoke of my death like it was a holiday gift. I opened the dresser drawer, my fingers brushing past socks to find a small envelope tucked in the back. It was George's, labeled "for emergencies" in his neat script. Inside was a note. "Hilda, trust your heart, but guard your money. Even family can forget." I'd laughed when he wrote it, called him paranoid. Now my throat tightened as I read it again. Had he seen this coming? Had he known Marcus would turn on me? I folded the note, my hand steadier, and tucked it back. I couldn't cry, not yet. Tears felt like surrender, and I wasn't ready to give up. I moved to the window, the glass cold against my palm. Outside, the backyard was dark, the swing set I'd bought for the kids swaying faintly in the breeze. I'd spent $300 on it, hauled it home myself when Marcus said they couldn't afford it. Lila used to beg me to push her giggles filling the air. But lately she barely looked up from her tablet, and Jamal only came to my apartment when Lisa sent him to check on Nana. I'd become a chore, a box to check off their list. How had I not seen it? How had I let myself shrink to fit their lives? I sat back on the bed, my mind replaying every moment I'd ignored. The way Lisa sighed when I offered to cook, the way Marcus dodged my questions about their finances. I told myself they were stressed, that they needed me to be patient. But patience had made me invisible. I thought of the Thanksgiving table I'd planned, the turkey I'd already bought, the sweet potato pie recipe I'd perfected for Jamal. I'd imagined us all together laughing like the family we used to be. But now that vision crumbled, replaced by the echo of Marcus's voice, so calm, so cruel. My fingers tightened around the edge of the mattress. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was too hollow for that, like a house stripped of its furniture. But something stirred, a faint spark of defiance. I didn't know what I'd do next, but I knew I couldn't stay this ghost, haunting a home I'd paid for. I reached for the notebook again, flipping past the page where I'd scrawled Marcus's words. I wrote one line, my pen pressing hard enough to tear the paper. I'm still here. I stared at it, the ink bleeding slightly, and felt a question take root. How much had I given, and what had they taken without asking? I closed the notebook, my heart pounding, and knew I needed answers, real ones, not the lies I'd told myself to keep the peace. The morning after Marcus's words gutted me, I woke to the hum of the heater in my tiny apartment. Its rattle a faint reminder that I was still here, still breathing. I sat at the edge of my bed, the notebook with his damning words, "If Mom dies, we'll finally be free," open on my lap. My fingers traced the ink, as if touching it could unravel the truth behind my son's heart. I, Hilda Braun, wasn't ready to confront him, not yet, but the spark of defiance I'd felt last night had grown into a quiet fire, urging me to dig deeper. What else had they taken? What else had I missed while I played the doting mother, blind to their betrayal? I shuffled to the small desk in the corner, my slippers scuffing the worn carpet. The desk held a laptop George had bought me years ago, its keys faded from use. I opened it, my hands hesitant, and logged into the joint account I'd set up when I moved in. A safety net for emergencies, Marcus had called it. I hadn't checked it in months, trusting him to manage it. The screen loaded and my breath caught. The balance was $3,349 and it should have been $10,000. My heart thudded as I scrolled through the transactions. Was $500 for a designer watch, $800 for a spa weekend, $20,300 for plane tickets to Miami, and other unexplained withdrawals totaling $2,186. Marcus's name was on every withdrawal, his digital signature mocking my trust. I stared at the numbers, my stomach twisting. How long had he been siphoning my money? I leaned back, the chair creaking under me, and pressed my palms to my eyes. When had I become their ATM? I thought of the times I'd found Lisa's new handbags tucked in the hall closet, her quick smile when I asked about them. "Just a little treat, Hilda." Marcus would shrug, saying, "She deserves nice things." I'd nodded, swallowing my questions, because I didn't want to stir trouble. But now those bags felt like theft. Each one bought with money I'd scraped together from my pension, money I'd meant for the kids' future. I stood pacing the narrow room, my eyes catching on the stack of unopened mail by the door. Bills, mostly, that Marcus always said he'd handle. I grabbed the pile, my hands shaking, and tore open an envelope from the mortgage company. The words "past due 90 days" burned into me. 3 months behind, with my name still on the deed because Marcus never filed the transfer papers. I trusted him, believed his promises that everything was fine. I sank to the floor, the letter crumpling in my fist. They weren't just wishing me gone, they were bleeding me dry while I lived under their roof. My mind raced back to a moment last summer. Marcus shifting in his chair at dinner, his jaw tight as he avoided my eyes when I asked about the mortgage. "It's all good, Mom," he'd said, too fast, his eyes darting to Lisa. She'd changed the subject, her laugh sharp like glass. I'd let it go, chalking it up to stress. Now, that memory felt like a warning I'd ignored. I pulled out another envelope, this one from the utility company, final notice. They hadn't paid the electric bill either, despite the $200 I'd slipped into their account last month. My chest tightened, a mix of rage and shame. How many times had I paid their way, thinking I was helping when they were just taking? I opened the notebook again, my pen hovering over a fresh page. I wrote, "They've taken everything." The words looked stark, final, but they steadied me. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining this. I flipped through the drawer, finding the deed to the house, my name printed clearly beside Marcus's. He'd promised to remove me, said it was just paperwork. But he hadn't, and now that oversight felt like my lifeline. I held the deed, its edges worn, and remembered George's warning. Guard your money, Hilda. I'd thought he was overly cautious, but he'd seen what I couldn't. That family could hurt you deeper than strangers. I stood at the window watching the morning light spill over the backyard. The swing set stood still, its chains rusted from disuse. I'd bought it for Lila and Jamal, picturing summer days filled with their laughter. But they hadn't played on it in months, too busy with screens or Lisa's endless activities. I'd let myself believe I was still part of their world, but the truth was colder. I was a guest in their lives, tolerated only for what I could give. My fingers tightened around the deed, the paper crinkling. What else had they hidden? How deep did this betrayal go? I heard the front door open, Marcus's voice calling out, "Lisa, you ready?" His tone was light, like nothing had happened, like he hadn't wished me dead last night. I stayed still, my breath shallow, as Lisa's heels clicked across the hardwood. "Yeah, just grabbing my bag," she said, her voice bright, carefree. I pictured her adjusting her sunglasses, the ones I'd seen on the counter last week, still in their $300 case. My jaw clenched. They were going out, probably to spend more money they didn't have, while I sat here holding proof of their lies. I turned back to Marcus, my shoulders squared now, and opened the laptop again. I needed to know everything, every withdrawal, every bill, every secret they thought I'd never find. I clicked into the account history, my eyes scanning the dates and amounts, each one a new cut. The question burned in my mind, sharper than the pain. How much more had they taken, and what would I do when I found out? I didn't have the answer, but I knew one thing. I wasn't their shadow anymore. I was awake, and I was looking. The afternoon light filtered through my apartment's single window, casting a dull glow on the deed I held, its edges worn from years of being forgotten. I sat at my desk, the laptop still open to the joint accounts, damning transactions, my heart a tangle of hurt and resolve. I, Hilda Braun, wasn't the woman who'd crumble anymore. Marcus's words, "If Mom dies, we'll finally be free," and the truth of their theft had stripped away my illusions. The past due mortgage notice and drained account weren't just betrayals, they were a call to act. But what could I do? How does a mother fight back against a son who sees her as a burden? I leaned back in the creaky chair, my fingers tracing the deed's fine print. My name, next to Marcos's, felt like a lifeline I hadn't known I needed. George's warning echoed in my mind. "Protect yourself, Hilda, even from family." I'd ignored him, thinking love was enough. Now I saw the cost of that trust. $20,000 gone, bills unpaid, my sacrifices mocked. I closed my eyes, picturing Marcus's glance away last week when I asked about the house payments, his right hand fidgeting with his phone. "All good, Mom," he'd said, too smooth. Lisa's tight smile had backed him up, her nails tapping the counter like a countdown. I'd let it slide, too afraid to push. But fear wasn't my anchor anymore. I reached for my phone, my hands steady despite the ache in my chest. I dialed Esther, the lawyer George and I had trusted for decades. Her voice, warm but sharp, answered on the second ring. "Hilda, you okay?" I paused, the weight of my next words pressing down. "I need to know my rights on the house," I said, my voice low. "My name's still on the deed." Esther's silence was brief, but I heard her pen click, a sound that grounded me. "You're still a co-owner," she said. "Marcus never filed the transfer. What's going on?" I swallowed, the truth too raw to say aloud yet. "They're taking advantage of me, Esther. I need out." She didn't push, just asked for details. The deed, the mortgage, the account. I told her about the $20,000 Marcus had siphoned, the unpaid bills piling up. "I'm not looking to hurt them," I said, though my voice wavered. "I just want to protect myself." Esther's tone hardened. "You've got options, Hilda. We can draft a notice to sell your share or force a buyout. It's your call." I nodded, though she couldn't see me, and said, "Start the paperwork. I'll let you know how far I want to go." Hanging up, I felt a shift, like a door unlocking inside me. This wasn't revenge. It was survival. I opened my notebook, the one where I'd written Marcus's cruel words, and started a new page. My pen moved slowly, each word deliberate. I gave them a home. They took my money. I gave them love. They wished me gone. I stopped, my breath catching at the starkness of it. But writing it made it real, gave shape to the hurt I'd carried. I added, "I'm taking back what's mine." The words felt like a vow, not to them, but to myself. I was no longer the invisible figure they dismissed, the shadow they ignored. I was Hilda Braun, and I was done shrinking. I stood, my joints protesting, and walked to the closet. Inside was a suitcase, its zipper rusted from years of disuse. I pulled it out, the sound loud in the quiet room. I didn't open it yet, just set it by the bed, a silent promise. I thought of New Orleans, a place George and I had dreamed of visiting, with its jazz and river breeze. I'd always put it off, saving for Marcus's needs instead. Now, the idea of starting over there felt less like running and more like reclaiming. But first, I needed to secure my place, to make sure they couldn't take more than they already had. I sat back at the desk, my eyes falling on a photo of Lila and Jamal, their smiles wide at a zoo trip I'd paid for last summer. I'd spent $80 on tickets, $20 on ice cream, just to see them happy. But last week, when I offered to take them again, Lisa waved me off, her eyes on her phone. "They're busy, Hilda," she'd said, her tone clipped. I'd smiled, nodded, like always. Now that memory stung, another clue I'd missed. They didn't just want my money, they wanted me out of the way. I opened a drawer, pulling out a folder of old documents George had insisted I keep. Inside was a copy of the co-ownership agreement, my signature bold beside Marcus's. I read it, line by line, my heart racing. They hadn't just forgotten to file the transfer, they'd counted on my silence, my trust. I set the folder down, my hands no longer trembling. I was starting to see the shape of their betrayal, and it wasn't just about money. It was about power, about them thinking I'd never fight back. Outside, I heard Marcus's car pull into the driveway, the engine cutting off with a sputter. His laugh carried through the wall, carefree, as if he hadn't stolen from me, hadn't wished me dead. Lisa's voice followed, sharp and impatient. "Just grab the bags, Marcus." I stayed still, my breath slow, listening to their footsteps fade into the house. They didn't know I was awake now, that I was watching. I closed the notebook, my pen resting on the page. A question burned in my mind, sharper than the hurt. What else were they hiding, and how much time did I have to act before they realized I wasn't their pawn anymore? I stood in the living room, the weight of the deed and Esther's draft notice heavy in my hand, like a shield I hadn't known I'd need. The house was quiet, the kids at school, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the only sound breaking the stillness. I, Hilda Braun, had spent the morning staring at the letter I'd written, each word a brick in the wall I was building to protect myself. Marcus's betrayal, his words, his theft, had carved a hollow in me, but I wasn't crumbling anymore. I was ready to face him. Could I look my son in the eye and say what needed saying? Could I walk away from the life I'd built for him? The front door creaked open and Marcus stepped in, his work boots scuffing the hardwood. He tossed his keys onto the coffee table, the clink sharp in the silence. "Mom," he called, his voice casual, like he hadn't wished me dead. I gripped the papers tighter, my heart pounding but steady. "In here," I said, my voice calm, though my insides churned. He walked in, his eyes skimming over me, then pausing on the envelope in my hand. His brow furrowed, just for a second, before he flashed that easy smile I used to love. "What's up?" he asked, leaning against the couch, his fingers drumming nervously on his knee. I took a breath, my eyes locking on his. "We need to talk, Marcus." My voice didn't shake, but it felt foreign, like it belonged to someone stronger. I set the deed and notice on the coffee table, the papers landing with a soft thud. "I'm selling my share of the house." His smile froze, then fell. "What?" he said, his voice sharp, like I'd slapped him. I held his gaze, my hands steady now. "I heard you, Marcus, that night in the kitchen. You said if I died, you'd be free, you and Lisa." His face paled, his phone slipping slightly in his grip. "Mom, Don't," I cut in, my voice low but firm. "I know about the account, too. The $20,000 you took. The mortgage you didn't pay, even though my name's on the deed." I pointed to the papers, my finger steady. "I trusted you, and you've been stealing from me." Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it, his jaw tight. Lisa's heels clicked as she entered, her purse slung over her shoulder, her eyes darting between us. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice high, like she sensed a storm. I turned to her, my chest tight, but my resolve ironclad. "I'm done being your burden, Lisa. I'm selling my share, or you can buy me out. Your choice." Lisa's eyes widened, her fingers clutching her purse tightly, a nervous tick I hadn't noticed before. Hilda, you're overreacting, she said, her tone too bright, like she was soothing a child. We're family. We'd never. I raised a hand, silencing her. Family doesn't wish each other dead. Family doesn't steal. I slid the letter across the table, its pages creased from my grip. This lists every dollar I've given you, every bill I've paid, every sacrifice I've made. Read it, then tell me I'm overreacting. Marcus picked up the letter, his hands shaking slightly, his eyes scanning the words I'd poured out last night. Every moment I'd felt invisible, every dollar they'd taken without asking. I watched his face, searching for the boy who'd once cried in my arms when his dog died. But all I saw was a man caught, his shoulders tense, his eyes avoiding mine. Mom, I didn't mean it like that, he said, his voice low, almost pleading. We were just stressed, the bills, the kids. I shook my head, my throat tight. You meant it enough to say it, Marcus. You meant it enough to let Lisa agree. Lisa stepped forward, her lips pursed. Hilda, you can't just upend our lives like this. The kids need this house. I looked at her, her perfect makeup a mask that couldn't hide her panic. The kids needed a grandmother too, I said softly. But you reduced me to a stranger in my own home. I turned back to Marcus, my heart heavy but my voice steady. Esther's handling the paperwork. You'll get the notice tomorrow. You've got 2 weeks to decide. Buy me out or we sell the house. So Marcus's face twisted, a mix of shock and anger. You're serious? You do this to us? I met his eyes, unflinching. You did this to me first. I picked up the deed, tucking it under my arm, and walked toward the hallway. Lisa called after me, her voice sharp. Hilda, wait, we can talk this out. I didn't stop, didn't turn. My steps echoed on the hardwood, each one a declaration of my resolve. I reached my apartment door, my hand on the knob, and paused. The house felt different now, like a stage where I'd played a role too long. I thought of Lila and Jamal, their faces bright in my mind, and my chest tightened. Would they understand? Would they hate me for this? I pushed the thought away, focusing on the letter I'd left on the table, the truth I'd laid bare. I'd given them everything, my home, my savings, my love, and they'd thrown it back in my face. But I wasn't done yet. I had one more move to make, one more way to protect myself and the kids I still loved. What would they do when they realized I wasn't backing down? I stood in my apartment, the suitcase open on my bed, its faded leather a testament to years of dreams deferred. The deed, Esther's notice, and my letter to Marcus lay beside it, their weight heavier than the clothes I folded. I, Hilda Braun, was leaving Chicago, but not without a final act, one that would protect my grandkids and force Marcus to face his shame. His cold dismissal echoed in my mind, but I'd found the strength to move beyond the pain. His cold dismissal still burned, but they no longer broke me. I was crafting a new path, one where my love for Lila and Jamal would outlast my absence. Could I leave them something meaningful without letting Marcus and Lisa off the hook? I sat at my desk, the morning light glinting off a photo of the kids pinned to the wall, their gap-toothed smiles a flicker of joy in my chest. I opened my laptop and drafted an email to Esther, my fingers steady as I typed. I'd set up a $50,000 trust for Lila and Jamal's education, drawn from my untouched savings account, the one Marcus never knew about. But there was a catch. Marcus had to publicly apologize at our church's community meeting, admitting his theft and betrayal. I leaned back, my breath slow, picturing his face when he heard the terms. Would he swallow his pride for his kids, or let his ego doom them? I wrote 2 letters by hand, one for each grandchild, my pen gliding over the paper. Lila, you're my sunshine. Never forget how strong you are. Jamal, keep asking questions. You're braver than you know. I tucked a photo from our zoo trip into each envelope, my fingers lingering on their faces. I'd spent $80 on those tickets, $20 on ice cream, but their laughter had been worth every cent. Now, I sealed the envelopes, my heart heavy yet resolute. These weren't goodbyes. They were promises that my love would endure no matter where I went. I called the airline, my voice firm as I booked a one-way ticket to New Orleans, using points I'd saved for years. Tomorrow morning, I told the agent, my eyes on the suitcase. George and I had dreamed of that city, its jazz and river air, a distant hope we'd shelved for Marcus's needs. Now it was my destination, a place to start over. I hung up, my pulse quickening, and packed the essentials, 2 sweaters, a scarf, and my Bible. The suitcase zipper snagged, its rusty teeth catching like my own hesitation. I tugged it shut, the sound final, like a door closing on the life I'd known. I slipped into the main house, the kids' school bags still by the door, their sneakers scuffed from play. I placed the letters under the Thanksgiving wreath I'd hung, its dried leaves crumbling at my touch. The house smelled of Lisa's lavender candle, burning on the counter, its flame flickering like her false warmth. I remembered her glance away yesterday when I mentioned the kids' school fees, her nails tapping her phone. "We'll handle it," she'd said too fast. I'd believed her then, but now I saw the lie in her eyes, the same lie Marcus hid behind his charm. I returned to my apartment, my steps quiet, and checked my phone. Esther had replied, "Trust is set. Notice sent to Marcus and Lisa. They'll get it today." My heart skipped, not from fear, but from the weight of what I'd done. The trust was my final gift, but the apology clause was my stand, a way to ensure Marcus faced his community, the people who'd known him since he was a boy. I pictured him standing in church, his hands fidgeting, his voice cracking as he admitted his wrongs. Would he do it, or would he let pride rob his kids of their future? I sat on the bed, the suitcase beside me, and opened my notebook. I wrote, "I'm not running, I'm choosing." The words steadied me, anchoring the courage that had been growing since I heard Marcus's betrayal. I wasn't just leaving, I was reshaping the story, giving Lila and Jamal a chance while holding their parents accountable. My mind drifted to New Orleans, to the life I could build there, free from the shadow of this house. But a question lingered, sharp and insistent. Would Marcus and Lisa realize the cost of their actions before it was too late? I heard the front door open, Lisa's voice floating through the wall, high and rushed. "Marcus, check your email, now!" His reply was muffled, but the edge in his tone was unmistakable. I stayed still, my breath shallow, as their footsteps hurried to the living room. The candle's scent lingered in my mind, a reminder of their careless spending while I'd scraped by. I stood, my hands steady, and zipped my jacket. I had one more night in this house, one more chance to see the kids before I left. I slipped their letters into my purse, my fingers brushing the photo of Jamal's sticky ice cream smile. Whatever happened next, I'd made my move. The question now was, what would Marcus do when the truth hit him square in the face? I sat on the plane, my hands folded over the purse holding Lila and Jamal's letters, the hum of the engines a steady pulse beneath my thoughts. I, Hilda Braun, was leaving Chicago behind, but the weight of what I'd done, the trust, the apology clause, the notice to sell, lingered like a shadow. Marcus and Lisa's world was unraveling, and I wasn't there to see it. My phone, tucked in my bag, buzzed with missed calls from Marcus, but I kept it off. I'd made my move, left my truth on their table. Could they face the consequences, or would they blame me for the mess they'd made? I leaned against the window, the clouds below a soft blur, and thought of the house I'd helped buy. My name on the deed, years of quiet support, all woven into their lives, now undone, all of it now a reckoning. Esther had texted before I boarded. "Notice delivered," Marcus called, frantic. "The church meeting is next Sunday." I pictured him reading the trust's terms, his fingers gripping the paper, his jaw tight as he realized he'd have to stand before our community and confess. Would he do it for his kids, or would pride choke him? My mind drifted to the church, its pews filled with faces I'd known for decades. Mrs. Jenkins, who'd baked me cornbread when George died. Pastor Green, who'd prayed with me through hard times. Marcus had grown up there, singing in the choir, his voice bright. Now he'd faced them, admitting he'd stolen from his mother, wished her gone. I saw Lisa's face, her perfect makeup cracking as whispers spread. She'd always cared about appearances, her smile tight when neighbors asked about me. "Hilda's fine," she'd say, her eyes darting away. I'd ignored those glances, but now they felt like clues to her guilt. I closed my eyes, the plane's hum fading as I imagined their morning in Chicago. The power was off by now. Esther had warned the utility company wouldn't wait. I pictured Lila waking to a cold house, her small hands clutching a blanket, asking why the lights didn't work. Jamal, curious as ever, would pester Marcus with questions. My heart ached for them, but I left those letters, my words a shield against their parents' failures. I'd written, "This isn't your fault. Nana loves you." I hoped they'd read them soon, that they'd understand I hadn't abandoned them, only freed myself. My phone buzzed again as we landed in New Orleans, but I ignored it, my fingers brushing the letters in my purse. The airport was a blur of voices and rolling suitcases, the air thick with humidity. I stepped outside, the sun warm on my face, and hailed a cab. The driver, an older man with a gray beard, glanced at me in the mirror. "Visiting family?" he asked, his voice kind. I shook my head, a faint smile tugging at my lips. "Starting over," I said, the words feeling real for the first time. He nodded like he understood and drove on. I thought of Marcus and Lisa scrambling in that dark house. Esther had forwarded their email to the mortgage company begging for an extension, but my name on the deed gave me power. They'd have to sell or find the money to buy me out, money they didn't have. I saw Marcus pacing, his phone in hand, his voice sharp as he argued with Lisa. "We can't lose the house," he'd say, his eyes wild. Lisa's response would be clipped, her lips pursed tightly, a habit that now screamed of her panic. They'd built their life on my sacrifices, and now that foundation was crumbling. I leaned back in the cab, the city unfolding outside, bright murals, jazz notes spilling from a corner bar. My heart still carried the kids, their faces a soft ache. I'd left them something real, not just money, but a chance to see their parents' truth. The trust's $50,000 would secure their future, but only if Marcus faced his shame. I pictured him in church, his hands clenched, the congregation's eyes heavy on him. Mrs. Jenkins would frown, her cornbread kindness forgotten. Pastor Green would shake his head, his prayers now for Marcus's soul. Would they forgive him, or would their judgment linger? The cab stopped at a small apartment near the French Quarter, its balcony draped with ivy. I paid the driver, my grip firm, and stepped out, my suitcase rattling behind me. The air smelled of river and spice, a world away from Chicago's chill. I thought of Lila and Jamal, wondering if they'd found my letters yet, if they'd read my words under the wreath. I'd written them to protect their hearts, to show them love didn't mean disappearing for others. But a question gnawed at me, sharp and quiet. Would Marcus's apology change anything, or had I lost him for good? I stood on the sidewalk, the suitcase at my feet, and looked up at the apartment. This was my new start, but the kids' faces stayed with me, their laughter a memory I couldn't shake. I'd given them everything I could. Love, a future, a lesson for their parents. Now it was their turn to live with the truth I'd left behind. I took a breath, the air warm and alive, and walked toward the door. What would happen when Marcus stood in that church, his secrets laid bare? I woke to the sound of a saxophone drifting through my new apartment's open window, the notes curling like smoke over the French Quarter's morning hum. I, Hilda Braun, stood on the balcony, my hands wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee, the Mississippi River glinting in the distance. New Orleans was my new beginning, a city George and I had dreamed of, now mine alone. The weight of Chicago, Marcus's betrayal, Lisa's coldness, the trust's sharp terms, felt lighter here, but not gone. My heart still carried Lila and Jamal, their faces a quiet ache. Could I build a life here without losing them entirely? The apartment was small, its walls painted a warm ochre, the floor creaking under my steps. I'd unpacked just enough. A few clothes, my Bible, a photo of the kids taped to the fridge. The suitcase sat in the corner, its rusty zipper a reminder of the life I'd left. I sipped my coffee, the bitter taste grounding me, and thought of the church meeting Marcus faced today. I pictured him standing before the congregation, his hands twisting, his voice low as he confessed to stealing my money, wishing me gone. Would he choke on the words, or would they set him free? I set the mug down, my fingers brushing the worn leather of my notebook. I hadn't written since I left, too raw to put words to this new chapter. But now I opened it, my pen hovering over a blank page. "I'm not running," I wrote. "I'm rebuilding." The words felt like a vow, a promise to the woman I'd forgotten how to be. I thought of George, his laugh when we danced to jazz records in our old living room. He'd wanted this for me, a life where I wasn't just a mother, a grandmother, a bank. I'd spent years giving, shrinking to fit Marcus's world. Now I was stretching back into myself. I walked to the French Quarter, the streets alive with vendors and music. A woman at a corner stall handed me a beignet, her smile warm as she said, "First one's on me, sugar." I took a bite, the powdered sugar dusting my fingers, and felt a spark of joy, small but real. I wandered past a dance studio, its sign advertising classes for seniors. I paused, my reflection faint in the glass, my braids loose under a scarf. I'd loved dancing once, before life became a list of bills and babysitting. I scribbled the studio's number on a napkin, my hand shaking slightly. Was I brave enough to start over, to be more than Marcus's mother? Back at the apartment, I checked my phone, its screen flashing with a new voicemail from Esther. I hesitated, my thumb hovering, then played it. Hilda, Marcus spoke at the church last Sunday, she said, her voice steady. He apologized, admitted everything. The congregation was rough on him. Call me. I set the phone down, my heart pounding. I saw Marcos, his shoulders slumped, facing Mrs. Jenkins's frown, Pastor Green's heavy silence. Lisa would have stood apart, her nails tapping her purse, her face tight with shame. I felt no triumph, only a hollow relief. They'd faced their truth, but it didn't erase my hurt. I stepped onto the balcony, the river breeze cool on my face. I thought of Lila and Jamal, hoping they'd found my letters, read my words of love. I'd left them under the wreath, a quiet gift to shield them from their parents' mistakes. But a question lingered. Would they understand why I left, or would they see me as the one who broke their home? I pushed the thought away, focusing on the street below, where a couple swayed to a busker's trumpet. I wanted that ease, that freedom to live without carrying someone else's weight. I signed up for the dance class that afternoon, my voice steady as I spoke to the instructor, a woman with kind eyes and a quick laugh. You'll fit right in, she said, handing me a flyer. I clutched it, the paper crinkling, and felt a flicker of hope. I'd shed the silent role I'd played in Chicago, fading into Marcus and Lisa's lives. Here I could be Hilda again, someone who danced, who laughed, who lived. I walked home, the flyer in my pocket, the city's rhythm pulsing through me. I passed a cafe, its chalkboard sign reading, "Live Music Tonight." I made a mental note to go, to let the music fill the spaces Marcus's betrayal had carved. Back in my apartment, I opened the notebook again. I wrote, I'm not gone. I'm here. The words felt like a declaration, not just to Marcus or the kids, but to myself. I thought of the trust, the $50,000 I'd secured for Lila and Jamal, tied to Marcus's apology. He'd done it, but what did it mean? Had he learned, or was it just another act to save face? I didn't know, and for the first time I didn't need to. I was building a life where their choices weren't my burden. I closed the notebook, my hands steady, and looked out at the city, its lights beginning to glow. What would I find here, in this place where I was no one's shadow? I stood on my balcony in New Orleans, the Mississippi's slow churn reflecting the morning sun, a jazz trumpet's wail weaving through the air. I, Hilda Braun, held a worn notebook, its pages filled with the weight of my journey. Marcus's betrayal, the trust I'd set, the life I'd claimed. A month had passed since I left Chicago, and the longing for Lila and Jamal lingered. But I was no longer the shadow I'd been. My heart was steady, my hands calm as I sipped coffee from a chipped mug. I'd built something here, something mine. Would Marcus ever understand the cost of his words? Or was my absence the only lesson he'd learn? My apartment was a small haven now, its ochre walls warmed by a string of fairy lights I'd hung. A new photo sat on the dresser, me smiling at a dance class, my scarf loose, my steps light. I'd gone to that jazz cafe last week, swaying to a saxophone, strangers clapping as I spun. I wasn't just surviving, I was living. But my phone resting on the table blinked with a new message from Marcus. I hesitated, my fingers brushing the screen, the familiar ache stirring. What could he say that would change the truth I'd faced? I played the message, his voice low, cracked. Mom, I'm sorry. I read your letter and what you wrote about everything we took. I didn't see it then. I do now. I set the phone down, my breath catching. I saw him in my mind, sitting in their new apartment, smaller now, the house sold to settle the debts. His hands would be clasped, his eyes down, the same way he'd looked when he apologized at church. Esther had called after, saying the congregation listened in silence. Mrs. Jenkins shaking her head, Pastor Green's gaze heavy. Marcus had admitted the theft, the cruel words, but I felt no victory, only a quiet release. I opened my notebook, my pen gliding over a fresh page. I'm not here to fix them, I wrote. I'm here to be whole. The words anchored me, a reminder that my worth wasn't tied to their regret. I thought of Lila and Jamal, hoping they'd read my letters, felt my love in the words I'd left under the wreath. I'd seen a text from Lisa last night, short and sharp. The kids miss you. No apology, just those words, her tone clipped even in text. I hadn't replied, my heart guarding itself against her old tricks. I pictured her tapping her nails, her face tight as neighbors whispered about their move. Had she learned anything? Or was she still hiding behind her pride? I walked to the riverfront, the breeze carrying the scent of beignets and mud. A street artist sketched a couple nearby, his pencil scratching softly, his eyes flicking up with quiet focus. I envied that clarity, the ability to create without carrying someone else's weight. I'd spent years carrying Marcus's, his bills, his dreams, his failures, thinking it was love. But love didn't mean erasing myself. I'd learned that here in the rhythm of the city, where I was Hilda, not just Nana or Mom. I sat on a bench, the wood worn smooth, and watched the river flow, steady and unapologetic. My phone buzzed again, an email from Esther. The house sale was final, my share deposited, the trust secure for the kids. Marcus and Lisa had moved to a cramped apartment near Lisa's sister, and their lives had been downsized. Esther wrote, "They're struggling, Hilda." Marcus asked if you'd call. I stared at the words, my chest tight but not breaking. I saw Marcus, his phone in hand, his voice soft as he asked for me, but I wasn't his to summon anymore. I typed a reply, "Handle it through legal channels. I'm not available." I hit send, my hands steady, the river's hum filling the silence. I wasn't running, I was choosing peace. I thought of the kids, their faces a constant pull. I'd left them a future, the $50,000 trust tied to Marcus's apology, a lesson in accountability. I hoped they'd understand one day that they'd see my leaving as strength, not abandonment. I pictured Lila reading my letter, her fingers tracing my words, Jamal asking why I'd gone. Would they forgive their parents, or would the truth linger like a scar? I didn't know, but I'd given them what I could, love, truth, a chance. I returned to the apartment, the fairy lights glowing as dusk settled. I opened the notebook, my pen steady. "I will never beg to be seen," I wrote. "I will never shrink to fit their lives." The words were a promise, a line drawn in the sand. I thought of George, his laugh, his warnings, his love that had carried me this far. I wasn't the woman who'd faded in Chicago, who'd let Marcus and Lisa take until I was empty. I was Hilda Braun, 68, dancing to jazz, breathing free. I stood at the window, the city's lights sparkling below. A question lingered, soft but persistent. Would the kids carry my love forward, or would Marcus's mistakes cast a shadow? I let it sit unanswered and closed the notebook. The trumpet's wail rose again, a melody of hope and loss. I wasn't looking back anymore. I was here, whole, and that was enough. This story isn't just about leaving a house or a city. It's about learning that love doesn't mean giving until you're empty. It's about finding the courage to draw a line to say, "I am enough." I, Hilda Braun, 68 years old, learned that my worth isn't measured by what I sacrifice for others, but by the boundaries I set to protect myself. I walked away from a life that diminished me, not to punish, but to live. True freedom comes when you love yourself enough to stop begging for a place in someone else's heart. Now, it's me again, your storyteller, stepping out of Hilda's shoes to talk to you. If this story moved you, hit that like button. It means the world to us. Subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss the next journey we share. Drop a comment below. What would you do if you faced a betrayal like Hilda's? Your stories keep this community alive, and I read every single one. Next time, we'll dive into another tale of resilience, one that'll make you laugh, cry, and cheer. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for feeling with us. Until next time, stay strong and keep shining.